What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a video about Divinity Original Sin 2 because I've heard some people wanted to play it. And the thing is, if you want to play Original Sin 2, you may well be interested in a wealth of information that, truth be told, the game doesn't do a particularly great job of telling you about, but are things you can either discover on your own or learn from others, such as how to enhance runes, how to enchant things, how to combine skill books, what the gift bags are, how to get a couple items that will auto-resurrect you when you die, that sort of thing, because Original Sin 2 is a game I have played more than most. I think it's like my third or fourth most played game of all time, in fact, and given the recent announcement of the next installment in the franchise, what better time than now to explain some of this stuff. With no further ado, let's actually dive into it. But the best place to start is not actually in a fully going game just yet, but it's actually with the difficulty and gift bag settings. Now on the main menu, you may notice on the left there's this icon with a bag on it. This will basically give you a rundown of the gift bags. The gift bags were free DLC that were released for the game in subsequent updates after it launched. Now you can't actually do anything with them from the main menu, this is just confirmation that they are installed. Once you actually get into the game proper and you open the menu, then you'll be able to actually interact with some of these. And these, in combination with the base difficulty settings, are going to determine how hard the game is for you. But the important thing to know about gift bags is that they are considered mods and they will turn your achievements off. Some of them are extremely overpowered, some of them don't really matter at all. So stuff like 8 action points, for example. The default is 4. If you have this on, you will instead get 8 every turn. Most actions cost 2 action points, and this will give you more movement as well, for example. The next one, 9 lives. This turns a black cat that you'll meet in Fort Joy into a permanent follower if you rescue it. Herb gardens are pretty useless, to be honest with you. Herbs are everywhere. I've never liked that one personally. Source meditation allows you to recover source points when you rest, which you would typically have to restore by either eating it from others or using source orbs or the like. From the ashes allows you to resurrect characters out of combat without using resurrection scrolls. Animal empathy is a huge one. So I've always told people this, but Divinity Original Sin 2 has a nonsense amount of content locked behind the Pet Pal talent, which allows you to talk to animals, and most of those animals have information or quests. It is a lot of stuff to miss. Animal empathy allows you to talk to those animals without the talent, saving it for other things. Haggler allows you to use your party for better prices. Combat randomizer does basically what you would expect. Crafter's kit introduces a bunch of new weapons and crafting to the game. Divine talents adds extra talents to the game. Enhanced spirit vision makes spirit vision an ability that you'll get in Act 2 that lets you see ghosts and spirits, a permanent thing rather than something you have to activate. The Fort Joy Magic Mirror gives you access to the Magic Mirror in Fort Joy. Normally you have to wait until you finish the initial opening area to get access to the Magic Mirror, which is effectively free respecs and cosmetic changes. Extremely useful in the late game, as you would imagine. This lets you just access it earlier. Improved Organization gives you a bunch of basically item-coded bags that allow you to sort your inventory better. Pet Power enhances summoning, which is insane because summoning is already extraordinarily overpowered in this game. It basically allows you to take infusions, and instead of using them on one specific summon, you can now use them on all of them. And then there is perhaps the single most important one, which is Sorceress Sundries. This adds a vendor to every major hub that allows you to get artifacts that will bring up the level of unique items, which we'll go over more in the item scaling section of this video, but that is extremely useful. Then you've got Endless Runner. This just increases your movement speed out of combat if you're, wanting to go faster. So that's kind of a general rundown of what the gift bags are. However, that is combined with the base game difficulty, of which it is Explorer, Classic, Tactician, and Story. Story was added later, and it's pretty much what you would expect, incredibly easy mode. Now, you may be tempted to start on Classic, and if you are brand new to this game, I would maybe consider doing Explorer first. The reason for that being is that while Divinity Original Sin 2 is not what I would consider a difficult game, it is a kind of game that you really need some base level knowledge before you even tackle normal mode. Like understanding what all the status effects do, the best ways to punch through enemy armor, or even how to commandeer the action economy, that kind of thing, because until you understand that stuff, you are more than likely going to get wrecked once you learn a lot of that stuff, even tactician mode becomes pretty easy breezy, and you might at that point want to tackle honor mode, which is an Iron Man mode. That is to say, your save gets deleted if you die, and it auto-saves every time a character dies. But that's pretty much what you're looking at in terms of general difficulty, which next then brings us to character creation, and there's honestly a lot to know here. So, for starters, there are the 6 origin characters. These are the Red Prince, Sabeel, Ifin, Beast, Losa, and Fane. Now, each of these characters is connected to the main story in some way and has more interactions as a result. If you don't choose to take any of these guys as your main character, you can pick them up as your companions because that's what they are if you are not playing them. Each of these guys has their own backstory. I've actually made lore videos going over each and every one of them. They're a few years old now, but they exist. And you can also listen to their origin story as a little refresher. But what's more than that, each of these individual origin characters actually gets unique abilities to use in combat, which is pretty handy. Like Fane gets Time Warp, Ifin gets like a Soul Wolf, Sabeel gets to sacrifice some Constitution for action points, that kind of thing. So stuff to know before you dive in. Now, if you would like to play an origin character and you're only going to play this game once, I would recommend Fane. He is kind of sort of the main character of the origin characters. It's not necessary to play as him, but he is much more involved in the main story than others really. So there's certainly that to know. But you don't have to play any of these guys. You can play a custom origin, which is divided into the game's 5 races: human, elf, dwarf, lizard, or the undead, who can technically be any of the other races. Now, some stuff to know here. If you are playing a custom origin, you get the racial trait for that origin, combined with a special ability called Dome of Protection, which restores magical and physical armor every turn. I mention that specifically because Dome of Protection is actually a really good ability. You just can't use it right away. But that's not the only thing to know. So each race that you play does have some typically unique stuff going on. Elves are probably the most notable because they have a type of interesting cannibalism that they can perform of sorts. So elves can eat the body parts of other sentient beings and relive some of their memories. This is a gameplay mechanic. If you eat the body parts you find with an elf, you'll get extra information. In some cases, that's like different quest solutions. It can be skills and stuff. Like, it's all sorts of stuff that will pop up. And it can be fun to play an elf just for that, but you can also use Sabeel for it if you have her in your party. Lizards can dig without a shovel. There are like little mounds and stuff you can find if you have the stats to reveal them, and you can dig them up with a lizard and not have to use a shovel for it, which sounds silly, but it's a thing. If you are playing undead, you don't have to have lock picks. They use their bony fingers to pick locks, which is kind of funny. And there's that. Now, before we leave the origin portion, you'll also notice the build preset down below. This is because Divinity Original Sin 2 uses a very free-form progression system where you can pick skills based on your stats, and you can learn them pretty much at will. So the build preset is just the starting point for your character, and you can even customize it pretty freely. This is just, again, the starting point. Now, once you've picked your cosmetic portion, you can actually do just that. That brings you to the preset tab, where you can adjust your attributes, abilities, and skills. So attributes are probably the simplest thing here, which is pretty much what you would expect. Strength, finesse, or dexterity, intelligence, constitution, memory, or wits. Strength, finesse, intelligence, and constitution, pretty much exactly what you would expect. They increase the associated damage with those things. Strength makes strength weapons better, finesse makes finesse weapons better, intelligence makes you deal more magic damage, or more specifically, intelligence-based damage, not technically speaking always magic, sometimes it's physical, caused by a spell, that kind of thing. Constitution, useful for everybody, just gives you more health. But what are interesting are actually memory and wits for 2 different reasons. Memory affects your ability to memorize skills. Every single character has to memorize skills. So while you can learn all of the skills if you have the appropriate stats, this is the other limiting factor. You have to be able to memorize them. You have a base 3 slots to do that with. Every point over 10 will give you another skill slot, which sounds like a lot, but some of the later, stronger source abilities actually required you have 2 or 3 slots open, so there is that. Now, honestly, most of the time you can rely on getting memory from items as like just extras that are tacked on to those items, so you don't necessarily need to put a lot of points in memory, but it is important to understand how it works. Which then brings us to Wits. Wits is interesting because it has one really good thing and one thing that is not so great, and that is critical chance and initiative. Critical chance can be very useful. If you have a lot of wits, you'll crit, and combined with things like finesse or the scoundrel ability, you can deal some serious damage with crit chance builds. The catch here, though, is that the other side of this, initiative, less than good. The game uses a round-robin system, which means you go and then the enemy goes always. The only real exception to that being just, sheer numbers of the action economy. Like if there's only 2 enemies, but there's like 4 or 6 of you, depending on you and your summons and stuff, then for that round, they'll at first intersperse between your first couple of actions, but then you'll go kind of all at once towards the end. This means that stacking stuff like initiative isn't super useful because of that round-robin system. We're far from done though, because then we have abilities. Abilities are divided up into combat and civil. Combat abilities are important because these are the different schools of abilities that you can actually learn. That is to say, things you can learn and then activate via your skill slots and stuff. These are Warfare, Huntsman, Scoundrel, Pyrokinetic, Hydrosophist, Aerotheurge, Geomancer, Necromancer, Summoning, and Polymorph. Warfare is your basic sort of fighter archetype, gives you a lot of great knockdown abilities to steal enemies from turns. Huntsman is like your ranger. They get a lot of abilities and damage that helps them attack enemies from above with something like a crossbow, for example. Scoundrel is your rogue type, but the catch there being that it's actually going to give you critical multiplier and movement speed, allowing you to move really far and deal a lot of damage, especially with backstabs, which are a function of things like finesse weapons, which let you get behind an enemy to deal increased damage. Then there is all of your different caster abilities. For the most part, these are pretty much what you would expect. Hydrosophist is going to help you recover magic armor and heal people generally. Geomancer will help you restore physical armor, which makes it a pretty good option for melee characters if you want to mix and match. Necromancer and Summoning are a little more interesting overall. Necromancer allows you to heal when you are hitting the direct health of an enemy. The more Necromancer you've got, the better you'll do here. Then there is Summoning. Summoning is insane and it pairs well with everything. The main function of Summoning is that it allows you an ability called Conjure Incarnate, which start out as just these little guys when you only have 1 point of Summoning, but when you get to 10 points of Summoning, it turns into a Champion Incarnate, which makes it even stronger, and both versions of it can be infused with different infusions which give that Incarnate abilities. This is powerful for a couple of reasons. Mainly, it gives you a 1-up on the action economy, and that is a huge deal in this game. And 2, the infusions can give your Incarnate the ability to take turns away from the enemy, so not only are you just getting more actions overall, because the moment you summon something, it goes immediately after that, but then you can also use its abilities to potentially stun enemies and just steal their turns at the same time. Incredibly strong in this game. And then last but not least, one of my personal favorites, which is Polymorph. So every point you put into Polymorph, in addition to meeting skill requirements, also gives you extra attributes, which can give you extra damage. But Polymorph is interesting because of the skills that it has. 1 point in Polymorph will give you access to one of the best stuns in the game, Chicken Claw, but it can also give you access to things like Tentacle Lash, which will cause atrophy to enemies, which means they can't attack. Later on, they get stuff like Wings, which lets them fly, or Apotheosis, which gives them all sorts of buffs. Polymorph is really cool. Now, in addition to that, there are also weapons and defense. So, depending on the type of weapon you want to use, single-handed, two-handed, range, that kind of thing, you're probably going to want to put some points into that. And then there's also defense. For the most part, I don't love defense. Leadership is okay if you want to give people some like general buffs, but more often than not, the best tactic is usually to just destroy enemies before they have a chance to do anything to you, which is very possible, as this isn't really the type of game you want to find yourself on the back foot in. However, when it comes to those combat abilities, you typically can pick 2 of the associated skill pools and then 1 weapon type. That's usually a good mix in terms of those. Like my personal favorite build is Warfare, Polymorph, and then like a 2-handed weapon. Not to say there aren't plenty of other broken options, that's just the one I like the most. Then we have our civil abilities. These are also really interesting. They are separated between craftsmanship, nasty deeds, and personality. So for craftsmanship, we have telekinesis and lore master. Telekinesis enables a lot of funny cheese because it allows you to move items regardless of their weight up to a certain range. This will let you do broken stuff like move incredibly heavy stuff that you've packed full of chests onto enemies and use that weight to kill those enemies. It's a well-known cheese tactic. It's very funny. Lore Master is going to let you identify items all on your own. It's usually very helpful to have at least one person in your party with Lore Master. So there's that. Then there is Sneaking and Thievery. This is going to let you sneak and steal things, if you would believe it. Thievery is actually pretty useful. There are items you can pickpocket off of certain individuals, which will make your life much, much easier, like for instance the Ashen Idol of Rebirth. But it's also going to let you do things like pick locks, which is handy. And then Sneaking will let you set up before certain encounters in a much more easy way, let's say. The higher you're sneaking, the less vision radius the enemy has on you. And then there is Bartering, Persuasion, and Lucky Charm. Bartering is prices, of course. Persuasion affects how much characters like you at a base. Every character in the game has a base attitude towards you. This will increase that, which will typically also help you with other things like conversation options and the like. Pretty self-explanatory on that one, though. So that's kind of what you're looking at in terms of abilities, but believe it or not, we are still not done with our preset because once you've picked that, you can pick your skills. Based on the abilities you pick, you'll be able to pick from 4 starter abilities for each ability that you picked. So for instance, here I've got Warfare and Polymorph, and so I can pick 3 skills from those to use as my starting abilities. Typically speaking, you're going to want the stuns, by the way. That's things that cause knockdown, like Charge, Battle Stomp, Chicken Claw, Tentacle Lash, stuff like that. Next up, however, once you finally got your preset all sorted out and customized the way you want it, then we can pick up talents. Talents are interesting. You get one of these every few levels or so, and these really all come down to the way you want to actually play the game. Generally, stuff like Executioner, Torturer is really great. Lone Wolf is really good if you want to play solo or with a single other person. Some of it is less good, like Mnemonic, as an example, will give you extra skill slots, but it is, again, really easy to get those just through like items and the like, which have memory stat on it. So that one isn't particularly useful, even if you can pick it towards the end game once you've got everything you need anyway. But then there's stuff like Comeback Kid, which allows you to resurrect at full health, which is helpful. Also important to mention that Opportunist, as an example, is something you'll probably want to pick up on all of your melee characters because you cannot perform opportunity attacks unless you have Opportunist as a talent. So there's a lot of really great talents, but it really does just depend on what you want to do with that character, as you would probably expect. But there is one I actually want to call out in particular, and that is Torturer. So at first read, this may not seem as busted as it actually can be, but essentially what this does is it allows certain statuses to cut through physical or magic armor. This is important because typically most of your status effects will not go through unless the enemy has no physical or magical armor left, which means you have to fight them first. There are some enemies, however, that Torturer can just completely trivialize. Because, for instance, Ruptured Tendons cause them to take damage when they move. So if I can get a rogue up close to hit an enemy with that, and then when they run, they're just going to delete themselves as they move, which can turn a difficult fight into a trivial one. Entangled is also one that works here. It's possible to lock down groups of enemies despite their magical or physical armor with this, and then you can just sort of blast them to bits with various AoEs, just as an example. Torturer can be a broken ability. So more than anything, it's really just kind of about learning how these things interact with what you want them to do more than it is the individual talents, but you'll wind up with many of these over the course of the game, so don't freak out, because combined with free respecs once you get to the magic mirror, either on the Lady Vengeance or if you have the gift bag turned on, you can also freely change these as part of that, so you're not like endlessly locked into this decision either. Second to last, you've then got the tags. Tags are effectively the conversation options your character has based on who they are. So this is things like their race and gender, but you can also pick 2 tags like Barbarian, Jester, Mystic, Noble, etc. And each of these gives you different conversation options that you can pick in certain situations. It is possible to get more tags as you play the game just from your actions and stuff, so keep that in mind as well. It's not a common thing, but it does come up. And then by far and away, the most important decision is actually the instruments. You see, every time you do something cool, there's going to be an instrument that plays in the background, and this choice is going to define you by giving you a sweet soundtrack. So don't underestimate this one. It is an important one. Now, once you've kind of got the gist of how you want to build a character and how that works, we can talk about the rest of the game, which I'd like to divide up into some general tips about how the game works, and then get into some system stuff on top of combat breakdowns. So on the general tip side of things, one of the easiest, just straight away outside of the gift bags and stuff, is actually to grab a bedroll, if you'd believe it. So you're going to start the game on a prison ship. The bottom deck of it is a tutorial, which will run you through some of the basics of how to like move and stuff. I would suggest you do that, obviously, rather than go up the ladder immediately once you are unchained from the table. If you take the open door, it gives you, again, just a little tutorial to kind of give you the basics of how things work. Once you head upstairs, though, once you kind of walk down the hall into the general area with the rest of the prisoners, you can find a bedroll to the side on the floor there. This is important because bedrolls let you rest outside of combat, which restores all of your health and stuff. You just click on it and you're good to go, and it'll save you a lot of time. Next up, we've got our skills. So as I mentioned, we do have to memorize skills to use them. Your 3 starting abilities will be memorized by default, but you also have to learn them to begin with, and that's usually done via skill books. Now, in order to learn a skill book, you have to have the appropriate level in the associated abilities, such as like, Warfare, Hydrosophist, Pyromancer, all that stuff. Basically, find the book, have the skill to use it, learn the skill, then memorize it, provided you have the slots to do so. That's how you use abilities here. Most hub towns are going to have several different vendors that will sell these skill books. So, go around, try to barter with people. It's usually an option with just about everybody, but you will find vendors that actually have the things you need as well. But you can also find these skill books around. It actually goes one step farther than that. Sometimes you can find unique skill books by doing certain things, but you can also combine skill books via the game's crafting system. Typically speaking, you can combine elemental skill books with other stuff to produce a unique effect. A really simple one is Blood Rain. You can take the Hydrosophist Rain ability, which is great for putting out fires and the like, combine it with a Necromancer ability, and suddenly you've got Blood Rain. Now this is useful for a variety of different reasons, like for instance, the Necromancer ability, get an ability that can actually soak up the blood around them to give them some healing, or just various things like that. This is also big because in combat, the terrain you're standing on, like what exactly you're standing on, matters a lot, but one step at a time. Now, skill books are not the only way to actually acquire skills technically, because sometimes items can give you skills as well. In fact, towards the starting area of the game, the Fort Joy prison area, you can get one of the best items in the game, specifically because it gives you a skill when you equip it, and these are none other than the teleportation gauntlets. Now, it is possible with enough Aerothurge skill and ability to learn an ability called teleport and do it that way. But the teleportation gauntlets are going to give you access to it much more quickly than that, and you can put them on any character and suddenly they have access to teleport, which also enables a bunch of really broken stuff. In order to get it though, you do have to get through a somewhat challenging encounter when you first start up the game, but it's not so bad once you kind of get some stuff under your belt, or if you just know how to abuse summoning. Basically, there are these 3 giant crocodiles to the side of the prison area, and if you kill them, one of them, you may notice, is teleporting around, and if that one is looted, you'll pick up the teleportation gauntlets from it. The teleportation gauntlets give you a variety of different ways out of Fort Joy, because your first task is to escape, and this will let you teleport people around, like up to a ledge to drop a ladder as an example, or to cross a large gap. Once you get these, keep them for the entire rest of the game. They are an incredibly useful item, but they're not the only way to do stuff like this, because there's also the teleportation pyramids. You'll ultimately get 4 of these over the course of the game, but you'll get the first 2, I believe, on the Lady Vengeance after Act 1. So you'll have to use the gloves until you get them, mind you, but the teleport pyramids are basically items that do the same thing by either interacting with them in your inventory or putting them down places and allowing you to just teleport to them. as long as you have the other one, because the teleport pyramids will transport you to the location of their alternate, basically. This means you can set one down in a location as a way to transport yourself back there immediately. You can also, via things like telekinesis, throw these teleport pyramids or get them into hard to reach places and then teleport yourself over there, as an example. This is another great way to do some really cheesy stuff if you can kind of set it up appropriately. Teleportation in this game is a lot of fun, I guess is what I'm getting at, so try to make the most of it. Now, another incredible item that I really wanted to mention here is not immediately useful because you need to get to at least Act 2 before you can actually make use of it, but it is the Idols of Rebirth. So, in Fort Joy, if you break into the actual keep portion of it and make your way down to the basement, you'll find an area called the Flintzer's Playground. There's a little mini-boss down here. It's a little disturbing, to be honest, and one of the examples of the way that Divinity can be incredibly dark while also kind of whimsical at the same time. But in a little side room before you step into the larger area that mini-boss fight takes in, you can find a book called Forbidden Objects or something like that, and it actually will give you the recipe for something called the Ashen Idol of Rebirth. You don't need to pick this up, but it is just a way to learn about the item, which is why I wanted to mention it, because later in Act 2, the main town there will have an inn called the Black Bull. There is some nefarious stuff going on in the basement. In particular, there is a woman who is actually some sort of spider being, and the catch is she's the person who has the Idols of Rebirth. You can get one from going along with what she says, which is to let her drain your constitution, basically, but if you pickpocket her after that, you can get a second one. Now the catch is, these items are actually some of the best stuff in the game because they allow you to auto-resurrect in combat. The Ashen Idols of Rebirth can be combined via the crafting system with a resurrection scroll, at which point it becomes the glowing Idol of Rebirth, and if you die while carrying one of those, it will resurrect you automatically. Now that's good, but it's actually not the best part of these. You see, why that is so strong is that using a resurrection scroll in combat requires 3 action points. Using the glowing Idol of Rebirth costs nothing, however, it goes even farther. You see, you can craft in the middle of combat. Crafting the Ashen Idol of Rebirth with a resurrection scroll to recharge it costs 2 action points. So not only will it auto-resurrect you, recharging it is cheaper than using a resurrection scroll. If you can get both of them, you will be extraordinarily difficult to kill. But let's rewind a little bit back to Act 1. So, on the island of Fort Joy, this basically serves as one big tutorial to the game outside of the actual tutorial. And one of the ways it does that is that you are going to, in the prison area, encounter all of your different potential companions, which are the different origin characters. On this island, you can sort of pick and choose who you want to hang out with, you can swap them out, that kind of thing. However, there is a point of no return after Act 1 when the interlude is kind of over. So you steal a ship called the Lady Vengeance. When you get the Lady Vengeance up and moving properly, it is important before Malady takes you forward, which is a character you'll meet as part of the main story. And the game will tell you about this point of no return, by the way. But in order to understand the context, you probably need to know about this still. So once you get to this conversation with Malady and you're about to take the Lady Vengeance away from Act 1, you need to have the party that you plan on keeping with you in terms of origin characters for the rest of the game in mind. Because whatever origin characters are not in your party when this happens will die. This is why it is impossible to see every origin character in a single playthrough, even if you're playing as one of them, because there's just not enough room for them in the party, as we are limited to 4 characters here. In case you're wondering, yes, it is possible to hire mercenaries, so if you just don't want to use any of these guys for some reason, that is also an option, but any origin character not in your party at this point dies afterwards. Speaking of the Lady Vengeance though, you're going to run into a character named Tarquin while you're exploring it. He's a real shady guy and you may be interested in putting him down. Don't. You can absolutely kill him along with most other people in this game if you really want to. Tarquin in particular though comes off as somebody who might be your enemy. He's not. Keep him alive. He's a very useful vendor and he gives you some really cool quests later. But realistically, if you're going to get farther into the game, one thing you have to understand is how to make yourself powerful, how to gear up, how to use items to the most advantage. And this is actually where I do have to mention a system in Divinity Original Sin 2 that I am not a wild fan of, and that is the way it does its item scaling. Now, levels matter in this game a lot, not only because of things like stat increases when you level up and the ability to spend more attribute points, that kind of thing, but actually because of the way item scaling works. You see, items can be divided into two things. Unique items, which have a set level that will always be, and then the regular items, which scale to your level when you find them. So if you pick up an item when you are level 20 and it's a generic item, it will be level 20 and it will scale appropriately. Unique items don't do that normally. That's interesting because they do have unique effects and stuff that you'll probably want to take advantage of, but you typically outgrow them because your level causes basic items to give you better stats. With the gift bags, there is a way around this though. The vendor that gets added to the hubs will sell you items that if you use them in crafting, you can combine them with the items that you want to increase the level of, and then you can use that to make regular unique items actually scale to your level. This is also the case for the armors and stuff that were added with the gift bags as well. Typically, if you have the whole set, it will scale them up to the max level as well. It's actually pretty important that you understand how that works, otherwise you might run into some problems with combat and the like. Speaking of items, there's also a couple systems here that are very easy to overlook. First of all, the combination and crafting recipes, you maybe want to look up a wiki or something in terms of what you can do there. There's a lot of really easy combinations that you can slap together to give you stuff that is better than you would expect. Now, the self-explanatory one for the most part is the rune system. You will find runes and you will find items that have rune slots, and you can put one in the other if you'd believe it. However, what might not be so obvious is you can also find these frames around, and you can use those in crafting and combine them with runes, which will give you masterwork runes, basically improving the runes and giving you better effects as you use them. For the most part though, that system's pretty simple. I'd be surprised if you missed it. However, what is extremely easy to miss is enchanting, because the game doesn't really tell you about it at all. So the game has what I call an enchanting system with the eternal artifacts. Throughout the game, especially on the Nameless Isle, which is Act 3, you'll find these eternal artifacts. They come in basically two types, these sort of rounder triangular ones and these ones that look a little more like a cylinder. They tell you that you might be able to find a use for them, but they don't say how. Well, basically what these are weapon and armor enchantments. You can combine the thinner one with weapons and the thicker ones with armor and stuff to add extra stat bonuses and stuff to your items. You are a little bit limited with these just because there are only so many eternal artifacts in the game, but you do get enough of them to kind of play around with this system a bit, and when you combine that with the gift bag that scales the items up for you, you can actually empower items to be much stronger than they would be normally with this. And again, it's just the kind of thing that is really easy to miss, because while you may, say, find a skill book that has combined two different types of abilities, you're never going to find anything that really tells you about the enchanting system. Now, I've mentioned crafting a few times, and it's honestly kind of part of this system, so there is a crafting system. If you know the recipe just off the top of your head, you can combine them manually and do it that way, but you can also read books and stuff to learn recipes, which will let you craft all sorts of stuff, makeshift weapons, bombs, throwables, grenades, things like that. You can craft all sorts of stuff, potions even. If you get a mortar and pestle item, you can even grind up herbs and stuff. Certainly something to know for sure. Now from here, let's go ahead and talk about combat to start wrapping this video up. So combat is a big part of this game, as you would expect. And the thing is, once you kind of learn what you can do in what situation and different ways to interact with the game, it gets really, really fun because your creativity is kind of the limit here. There are encounters that are certainly very difficult, but understanding the way the game works and how to break it is something that the game will often reward you for. It's an incredibly reactive system, even just beyond the actual choices you can make. And it's one of the things I like the most about it. But it's also important to understand some really basic fundamentals beyond the stats and attributes that we went over in character creation. So for starters, accuracy. This is pretty basic. Everybody has a base 95% accuracy that will then be modified by stuff to give you your actual chance to hit. For example, an easy one is dodge. Dodge is essentially a stat that decreases the incoming attack's accuracy, your chance to dodge it, basically. This is mostly modified by like skills and stuff, but items can do it as well. For instance, a real simple example, crossbows give plus 5% to accuracy. So more often than not, if you're having trouble with chance to hit, which is, to be honest with you, kind of rare, it's more than likely some sort of status effect causing the problem that you're going to want to clear up to deal with the issue. Another central piece of the way this works is the basic action setup. So by default, you'll have 4 action points to spend on movement and whatever actions you want to take that turn. Most actions take 2 action points. There are exceptions to this, and there are skills that will use less and more. More often than not, though, 2 action points. The catch is you also have to move with your action points. And this is why skills that cost typically 1 action point but help you move really long distances can go a really long way for you, as you would probably expect. Then also, being able to move farther per action point via your attributes and stuff is also really helpful. But this is where abilities that will just teleport you across the field can make up for even that deficiency, but it's important to understand the basics of how it works, of course. Your character has a movement stat, and how far you can move per action point is based on that movement stat. Now, because of this limitation and the fact that it's a turn-based game, one of the best ways to get good at this game is to learn how to abuse the action economy, as you may well expect. Now, the simplest way to do this, truth be told, is through the summoning tree. This is because between conjuring your incarnate and other abilities and the elemental totem, which will let you spam basic attacks and potentially eat enemy attacks if they choose to attack the totems or the incarnate, or if you have infusions on the incarnate, it might have abilities that just knock enemies down or steal turns, that kind of thing. Basically, making sure that you have more turns than the enemy is one of the easiest ways to ensure victory here. Which sounds simple in practice, but, actually doing it is the issue, and that comes with knowledge. Now, the main thing that will prevent you from doing this, or stealing turns from enemies in particular, is their physical and magical armor, which is why something like Torturer is so good, because it lets you cut straight through that. There are certain scoundrel abilities that will let you damage enemies through that, like with Rupture Tendons. But in order to knock something down, steal its turn, through any other stun, that kind of thing, you need to chew through its armor first. Now, some people will tell you need to focus on one armor type or the other as a result of this, but that's not really true. Even on the highest difficulties, it's unnecessary. It's more about just learning how to get through those armors, because once you do, you can, if you have the skills for it, basically permanently lock stuff down. But speaking of locking stuff down, positioning is really important for a variety of reasons. For starters, if you have the high ground, you will typically deal more damage and be able to use abilities farther. Like, for instance, every area you see that has a bunch of green plus signs, that is extra range you are getting from having the high ground. This is why abilities that teleport you up to high ground with a ranged ability will give you much, much better range, and it's really useful to do that as an example. This is where Huntsman characters get a lot of use because they have abilities like Tactical Retreat, which just let them instantly teleport to the high ground, and they have an enormous range and extra damage from being up there from part of their Huntsman toolkit. And so that's a really basic way to take advantage of the terrain. Now, the other one is really more of what Divinity is known for, which is the elemental and ground effects. So I mentioned much earlier that where you're standing is a very important thing, and that's because it is, of course. Most abilities, I would say more often than not, will leave some type of effect on the ground beneath your feet. This can be things like water, blood, or more immediately obvious stuff like fire and the like. The catch is, all of this stuff can interact with other things more often than not. For instance, you can electrify water or blood. That's a really simple example. Much later, when you start encountering Voidwoken, they can curse these things, which makes them more difficult to deal with. Like, for instance, fire can be cursed to become Necrofire, which is much harder to put out. you'll have to use an ability like Bless to remove the curse on that necrofire in order to then put it out with something like Rain. There are a nonsense amount of these interactions, and because of the way late game encounters in particular, or really just mid to late game encounters, become a bit of a, I would say, clown show in terms of like just the sheer amount of ground effects at play, it's important to understand how they work and how to deal with them and the ways to protect yourself. Typically through things like your physical and magical armor will eat this stuff up, but also, increasing your resistances or just finding ways to neutralize the problem to begin with, as an example, can be an easy way to turn a fight where you're just getting obliterated into something more manageable. But speaking of effects, probably worth a mention about the instant death effects. So there is a sort of environmental effect called death fog, and also just straight up lava. These will kill you immediately. Death fog you can actually be immune to if you're playing an undead character, and that goes for enemies too. It is possible to find barrels of death fog and use that to your advantage by teleporting it over to living enemies and then killing them, but then you'll need another ability, like I think it's called Tornado or something, to clear those air effects, and if you want to actually go through there, because it will kill your living characters as well. Lava's a fun one. You can teleport people into lava or death fog as an example, which is an instant death thing in most cases. There's not a ton of lava in this game, but outside of just teleporting enemies into it, you can also use a polymorph ability to terrain swap, which is move the lava from where it is to where you would like it to be. In fact, on the Nameless Isle, where you can find a good amount of lava, there are like multiple little bosses you can just one-shot using the terrain in this way. If you manage to pick up and save death fog barrels, you can use that to one-shot a lot of bosses. There's a lot of really cheesy stuff you can do if you understand how these environmental actions work and the ways in which you can use them to your advantage. This is what is going to trivialize a lot of stuff that you might struggle with otherwise. So when it comes to combat, more than anything else, understand the basics and then understand how to dominate the action economy as well as use the terrain. Those are really the biggest individual things you can learn how to do for yourself, because everything else will follow on from there. But I would be remiss not to mention the best and biggest abilities, which are typically your source abilities. So in Act 1, you can't really use this because you are source muted with a source collar that inhibits your ability to channel source. As our character, the reason we are in prison is because we are a sorcerer, someone who can use source. So every one of your characters will have a source ability by default, just to reiterate that they are sorcerers, but you can't use it in Act 1 because you don't have access to your source until you get your source collar off. It is possible to get it off one person in Act 1, so technically you do have a little bit of access to it, but you won't have like full sweeping access until you get off of Act 1 when Malady will remove them from all of you. Now, but that's just the beginning though. As you move through the game, you can find abilities for every like individual class type, more or less, where it will give you up to 3 source points to then spend in addition to action points on that ability, and typically these are the best of the best stuff. The catch is, in Act 2, you have to expand your ability to channel source from 1 point up to 3. I mean, technically you don't have to, you can fail at it, but you're going to make your life a lot harder. So source is another thing you have to be aware of. As part of typically the main story, you'll get a lot of abilities to manipulate source, like, Spirit Vision, which will give you alternate quest solutions, that kind of thing. However, this all kind of does start in Act 1, actually. In particular, you can have a conversation with your god. So based on your race and, origin character, that kind of thing, there is a cave on Fort Joy. At the end of it, there is a statue with no hands. And if you interact with that statue, it will take you to a place called Hall of Echoes, where you'll meet your god. And they will give you an ability called Bless. Bless is really useful because it lets you clear out things like Necrofire, which can make some encounters really easy, but that's something you probably don't want to miss in Act 1 because it will let you deal with a lot of otherwise very nasty encounters, especially once you get out of the prison area and into the marsh. So putting all of that together, the best way to get into combat encounters, figure out what to do, that kind of thing, especially if you're struggling, don't be afraid to play on a lower difficulty at first until you kind of get the idea of how everything works, but basically the gist of it is take as many enemy turns away from them as possible with stuns and the like. In order to do that, you need to get through their armor. Learn how to do that. There are cheese tactics, things like teleportation. Get involved in those systems, kind of learn how stuff works, learn how to break them, and more often than not, the game expects you to do that, and it will reward you for doing that in many cases. Whether that be an instant death effect or something altogether more funny, like teleporting them to somewhere random, or separating enemies via teleportation, setting up barriers, forcing them to run to you and waste their turn, that kind of thing. Basically, when it comes to combat, anything that gives you a turn advantage will more than likely be a good way to approach combat. But experience is more valuable than anything, and I hope at least some of this was useful information to you, and to that end, if you'd like to add anything to this that you enjoy yourself, by all means, drop it down in the comments section below. I am hardly the only source of good information on this kind of thing, but more than anything, a lot of this game just comes down to how familiar you are with what it is trying to do. And if you can get past that initial knowledge barrier, this game is so much fun. But I think that is just about going to do it for this new player's guide. Otherwise, I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know down below if this wound up helping you play, or if you learned something new. I'd love to hear about it. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.